The small Zephyrian vessel that carried Marcus and Queen Lyrelai away from the palace ship was not built for long-distance travel, and after 2 days of hiding in the shadow of a distant moon, their situation had become desperate. The civil war raging throughout the Zephyrian Empire was visible even from their remote location, as flashes of weapons fire and explosions lit up the space around the major population centers. Sub-Commander Lyrian, who had escaped with them along with 50 other emotionally awakened Zephyrians, worked frantically at the communication console trying to coordinate with resistance cells throughout the Empire. Her face, which now showed worry and determination instead of the traditional Zephyrian mask of indifference, reflected the strain they were all feeling. "Your Majesty," Lyrian reported, "we're receiving transmissions from 12 different star systems. The emotional awakening is spreading faster than Lord Zarian's forces can contain it, but his neural suppression fields are causing terrible damage to those who resist. Some of our people are dying rather than return to emotional numbness." Queen Lyrelai stood at the small viewport, her luminous skin dim with grief as she watched the destruction of her empire. Marcus had never seen her look so beautiful or so heartbroken. The tears that streamed down her face caught the starlight like liquid diamonds, and her shoulders shook with the weight of responsibility she felt for her people's suffering. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I started this war by choosing to feel." Perhaps Lord Zarian was right. Perhaps emotions truly do lead to destruction. Marcus moved to stand beside her, gently taking her hand in his. Over the past week, he had fallen completely in love with this remarkable being who had risked everything to discover what it meant to be truly alive. "No," he said firmly. "What's happening out there isn't because of emotions. It's because some people are afraid of change and would rather destroy something beautiful than let it grow." Queen Lyrelai turned to look at him, her luminous eyes filled with pain and doubt. "But look at the cost, Marcus. My empire is destroying itself. Millions of Zephyrians are suffering because I chose to follow my heart instead of my duty." Before Marcus could respond, a new alarm began sounding throughout their small ship. Lyrian's voice called out urgently from the communication station. "Your Majesty, we have incoming ships. Multiple vessels approaching our position." Everyone on the ship tensed, expecting to see Lord Zarian's traditionalist forces arriving to capture or destroy them. But as the approaching vessels came into visual range, Marcus felt his heart leap with hope and relief. The ships were human. Not just 1 or 2 vessels, but an entire fleet led by the massive form of the UES Armstrong, Earth's most advanced dreadnought. Marcus recognized the distinctive design of Admiral Sarah Rodriguez's flagship, and he understood immediately what this meant. "They came," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "Earth heard about what was happening and they came to help." The communication system crackled to life with a familiar voice. "This is Admiral Rodriguez of the United Earth Space Navy, calling Queen Lyrelai of the Zephyrian Empire. Your Majesty, we've received reports of the situation in your territory. Earth officially recognizes your authority as the legitimate ruler of the Zephyrian people, and we're here to offer assistance." Queen Lyrelai stared at the human fleet in amazement. "But why?" she asked. "Why would your people risk war with the traditionalist faction to help us?" Admiral Rodriguez's voice carried warmth and determination. "Your Majesty, any species brave enough to choose freedom over fear, love over control, has earned humanity's friendship and protection. We've seen what happens when civilizations are built on suppression and hatred. We won't stand by and watch while yours tears itself apart for learning to feel." The arrival of the human fleet changed everything. Within hours, Marcus found himself aboard the Armstrong, reunited with Ambassador Williams and briefing Admiral Rodriguez on the complex situation within the Zephyrian Empire. The Admiral, a veteran of multiple interstellar conflicts, listened carefully as Marcus explained how the Empire had divided between those embracing emotions and those clinging to the old ways. "The traditionalists control most of the military infrastructure," Marcus explained, "but the emotional awakening is spreading through the civilian population faster than they can contain it. Queen Lyrelai's people don't want to fight, but they refuse to give up their newfound freedom to feel." Admiral Rodriguez studied the tactical displays showing the positions of various Zephyrian fleets. "Then we don't solve this through force," she decided. "We solve it through something more powerful than weapons. We show them what humans do best." The plan that Admiral Rodriguez proposed was audacious and uniquely human. Instead of engaging the traditionalist forces in battle, the human fleet would broadcast a message throughout the Zephyrian Empire. But not just any message. Queen Lyrelai would speak directly to her people about the beauty and strength that came from embracing emotions, and her words would be backed by the most powerful demonstration humanity could offer. The broadcast began with Queen Lyrelai standing on the bridge of the Armstrong, her regal form illuminated by the stars visible through the massive viewports. She spoke in her musical Zephyrian language, but her words were translated for all to understand. "My people," she began, her voice carrying across space to reach every Zephyrian in the Empire. "For 3,000 years we have lived in fear of our own hearts. We convinced ourselves that emotions were weaknesses, that feeling deeply would lead to chaos and destruction. But I have learned something that changes everything." As she spoke, the human fleet began its demonstration. Ships throughout the formation released thousands of small pods that spread out across space, each one containing recordings of human culture. Music, poetry, art, stories of love and loss, triumph and tragedy, all the emotional expressions that made humanity unique. "Emotions do not make us weak," Queen Lyrelai continued. "They make us strong enough to care about something more than ourselves. They give us the courage to risk everything for love, to fight for justice, to sacrifice for others. The humans who came to help us today did not do so because logic told them it was efficient. They came because their hearts told them it was right." The broadcast reached Zephyrian worlds throughout the Empire, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. On planet after planet, Zephyrians began openly weeping, laughing, expressing joy and wonder as they listened to their queen's words and experienced human emotional art for the first time. But the most powerful moment came when Queen Lyrelai turned to face Marcus, who stood beside her on the bridge. In front of billions of watching Zephyrians, she took his hands in hers and spoke the words that would be remembered throughout galactic history. "This human taught me what it means to love," she said, her luminous skin glowing brighter than ever. "Not the logical partnership that my people have practiced for millennia, but true love that transforms you, that makes you brave enough to be vulnerable, that gives your life meaning beyond mere survival." She looked directly into Marcus's eyes, and her smile was radiant with joy and determination. "Marcus Chen of Earth, you asked me once if emotions made beings stronger or weaker. Today I give you my answer through my actions. I choose love over fear, feeling over numbness, life over mere existence." The effect of her words was like a shock wave spreading through space. On world after world, Zephyrians threw off their emotional suppression and began to truly live for the first time in 3,000 years. Even many of the traditionalist forces began to desert their posts, unwilling to fight against the promise of genuine happiness. Lord Zarion's final transmission came hours later, his ancient voice filled with defeat and something that might have been wonder. "Your Majesty," he said, "I have lived for over 5,000 years without feeling a single moment of joy, watching my people discover happiness. Perhaps there are things more important than the old ways." The Civil War ended not with a final battle, but with a celebration that lasted for days. Zephyrians throughout the Empire learned to laugh, to cry, to sing, and to love. The neural suppression fields were shut down, and for the first time in millennia, an entire civilization chose to feel. 1 month later, Marcus stood beside Queen Lyrelai in the same hall of convergence where they had first met. But this time, the chamber was filled with music and laughter, with Zephyrians expressing emotions that their ancestors had forbidden. The ceremony taking place was one that had never occurred in Zephyrian history, a wedding between their queen and a human, a celebration of love that transcended species and defied every tradition their society had held sacred. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through whatever challenges the future might bring, Marcus realized that the most important diplomatic mission in human history had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams. They had not just formed an alliance between two species. They had helped an entire civilization discover what it meant to be truly alive. Queen Lyrelai's question, asked with such courage in front of her disapproving court, had become the catalyst for the greatest transformation in galactic history, and Marcus's answer, given with equal bravery, had helped prove that love was indeed the strongest force. 3 days had passed since the ceremonial first contact, and Marcus found himself studying the cultural archives in the human quarters with growing concern. The more he learned about Zephyrian society, the more he understood how serious the Queen's moment of emotional display had been. According to the historical records, the Zephyrian Empire had built their entire civilization around the complete suppression of emotions. The archives told a dark story. Thousands of years ago, the Zephyrians had been much like humans, experiencing the full range of feelings and emotions, but their homeworld had been torn apart by devastating wars caused by jealousy, rage, and passionate disagreements between different factions. Entire continents had been destroyed, and billions of Zephyrians had died in conflicts that started from emotional disputes. After the Great Devastation, as they called it, the surviving Zephyrians had made a collective decision to eliminate emotions from their society completely. They developed mental techniques and technologies that suppressed emotional responses, believing that logic and reason alone would prevent such disasters from happening again. For 3 millennia, their empire had grown and prospered under the system of perfect emotional control. Marcus closed the archive file and rubbed his eyes tiredly. Ambassador Williams had been in emergency meetings with the human diplomatic team since the ceremony, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. The Zephyrian officials had been polite but distant, and there had been no further contact with Queen Lyralee herself. A soft chime from the door communication system interrupted his thoughts. Marcus activated the display and was surprised to see High Counselor Valdris standing in the corridor outside. The tall Zephyrian was alone, which was unusual, as officials typically traveled with escorts. "Commander Chen," Valdris said when Marcus opened the door, "Her Majesty Queen Lyralee requests a private audience with you to discuss matters of diplomatic protocol." Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but he kept his expression neutral. "Of course, High Counselor. When would be convenient?" "Now, if you are available. The Queen wishes to review certain aspects of human customs to ensure proper understanding for future interactions." Marcus nodded and followed Valdris through the winding corridors of the palace ship. Instead of heading toward the formal meeting chambers, however, the High Counselor led him to a smaller, more intimate section of the ship. The walls here were made of a different material, something that seemed to absorb sound and create a sense of privacy. They stopped at a door that was smaller and more elegant than the others Marcus had seen. Valdris gestured for him to enter but did not follow. "Her Majesty will see you alone," the counselor said, though Marcus noticed a slight tension in his musical voice. The room beyond the door was unlike anything Marcus had seen on the Zephyrian ship. Instead of the cold, geometric patterns that decorated most of the vessel, this chamber had curved walls and soft lighting. There were what appeared to be seats arranged in a comfortable conversation area, and the walls displayed slowly shifting patterns of color that were actually quite beautiful. Queen Lyralee stood near a large window that looked out into space, her tall form silhouetted against the stars. She turned when he entered, and Marcus was struck again by her ethereal beauty. In the softer lighting of her private chambers, her luminescent skin seemed to glow more warmly, and her eyes held depths he hadn't noticed before. "Commander Chen," she said, her voice carrying the same musical quality as other Zephyrians, but with subtle undertones he couldn't identify. "Thank you for accepting my request to meet." "It's an honor, Your Majesty," Marcus replied, staying near the door and maintaining what he hoped was appropriate formal distance. Queen Lyralee gestured toward the seating area. "Please be comfortable. I hope you will forgive the informal nature of this meeting, but I have questions about human behavior that I cannot ask in public." As they sat across from each other, Marcus noticed that the Queen's perfectly composed expression seemed different somehow. Her eyes were more active, moving and focusing in ways that seemed more human. "I have been studying the cultural materials your delegation provided," she began. "Your species places great value on something you call emotional expression. This is a concept that is difficult for my people to understand." Marcus chose his words carefully. "Emotions are a natural part of human experience, Your Majesty. We believe they help us connect with each other and make decisions that consider not just logic, but also compassion and empathy." The Queen leaned forward slightly, a movement that would have been unthinkable for a Zephyrian in public. "When our hands touched during the ceremony, I experienced something I have never felt before. Your archives describe it as wonder, I believe. How is it possible that such a brief contact could create such a powerful sensation?" Marcus felt his breath catch. The Queen was admitting to having felt emotion, and she was asking him to help her understand it. In Zephyrian society, this was probably the most dangerous conversation she could have. Sometimes, Marcus said carefully, humans experience immediate connections with others. We call it chemistry or attraction. It's not something we can control or predict. It just happens. Queen Laerale's eyes widened and her skin flickered with golden light for just a moment before she regained control. Attraction, she repeated. Your files mention this in the context of mate selection and pair bonding. Yes, but it's more complex than that, Marcus explained, finding himself drawn into the conversation, despite the potential dangers. Attraction can be emotional, intellectual, or spiritual. It's about recognizing something in another person that resonates with something in yourself. For the next hour, the Queen asked question after question about human emotions and relationships. She wanted to know about laughter, about tears, about the way humans express joy and sorrow. Marcus found himself sharing stories from his own life, describing the feeling of watching a sunset, the satisfaction of helping a friend, the bittersweet pain of missing someone you cared about. As he spoke, he watched Queen Laerale's face transform. Her neutral expression gradually gave way to something more animated. Her eyes began to sparkle with curiosity, and tiny expressions flickered across her features as she processed each new concept. When he described the human concept of music, she asked him to play examples from his personal files. The first song that played was a gentle melody from Earth, something with strings and soft vocals. As the music filled the room, Queen Laerale's reaction was extraordinary. Her silver skin began to glow more brightly, and she closed her eyes as if concentrating intensely. When the song ended, she opened her eyes and Marcus saw something that shocked him. There were tears on her cheeks, not human tears but drops of luminescent fluid that caught the light like liquid diamonds. What is happening to me? She whispered, touching her face with wonder. I feel as though something inside me is awakening, something that has been sleeping for my entire life. Marcus felt a deep sense of responsibility and concern. Your Majesty, in my culture we would say you're learning to feel, but I know this goes against everything your society believes. Queen Laerale stood and walked to the window, her movements less controlled than before, more natural. For 3,000 years my people have believed that emotions lead to chaos and destruction. But what I'm experiencing now doesn't feel destructive. It feels like I'm becoming more myself, not less. She turned back to Marcus, and her expression was one of determination, mixed with vulnerability. I want to learn more. I want to understand what it means to feel joy, to experience wonder, to connect with another being on a level deeper than mere logic. Marcus stood as well, sensing that this conversation was reaching a critical point. Your Majesty, I'm honored that you're sharing this with me, but I'm concerned about the consequences. If your people discover that you're experiencing emotions, let me worry about my people, the Queen said, and there was something in her voice that hadn't been there before, strength perhaps or determination. For the first time in my life I feel truly alive. Whatever the cost, I cannot go back to being what I was before. As their private meeting came to an end, Queen Laerale made a request that surprised Marcus completely. She wanted him to return the next day and the day after that. She wanted to learn everything he could teach her about human emotions and relationships. But we must be careful, she warned. There are those among my court who already suspect that something has changed. High Counselor Valdris has been asking questions, and the Noble Council has requested private meetings to discuss my unusual behavior during the ceremony. As Marcus prepared to leave, the Queen caught his arm gently. Commander Chen, Marcus, she said, using his first name for the first time, thank you for showing me that there is more to existence than mere survival and logic. Whatever happens, I will not forget what you have given me. Marcus left the Queen's private chambers with his mind spinning. He had come to the Zephyrian Empire as part of a diplomatic mission, but somehow he had become something much more dangerous. He was teaching an alien queen to feel, and in doing so he might be helping to destroy the very foundations of her civilization. But as he replayed their conversation Marcus had been meeting privately with Queen Laerale for 6 days when everything changed. Each session had been more remarkable than the last, as he watched the alien queen discover emotions that her people had suppressed for millennia. She had learned to laugh at human jokes, had wept over tragic love stories, and had gasped with delight at recordings of Earth's natural wonders. But Marcus should have realized that such dramatic changes in their ruler would not go unnoticed by the Zephyrian court. He was walking back to his quarters after their latest meeting when Councillor Valdris intercepted him in the corridor. This time the tall Zephyrian was not alone. 6 guards in ceremonial armor flanked him, their faces as emotionless as stone statues. "Commander Chen," Valdris said, his musical voice carrying an edge of steel that Marcus had never heard before. "You will come with us immediately." Marcus felt his heart rate spike, but he kept his voice steady. "Is there a problem, High Counselor?" "That will be determined by the Noble Council," Valdris replied. The guards moved closer, making it clear that this was not a request. They escorted Marcus through sections of the palace ship he had never seen before, deeper into the vessel's core where the walls were made of dark metal instead of crystal. The corridors here felt colder, more oppressive, and Marcus realized he was being taken to some kind of detention area. The chamber they brought him to was vast and intimidating. 12 Zephyrians sat in a semicircle on raised platforms, their silver forms imposing in the dim lighting. These were clearly the most powerful nobles in the Empire, beings whose authority was absolute except for the Queen herself. At the center of the group sat an ancient Zephyrian whose skin had a darker, more metallic appearance than the others. "I am Lord Protector Zerion," the ancient being announced, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "I speak for the Noble Council in matters of imperial security. You stand accused of the most serious crime possible in our civilization, human. You are charged with emotional terrorism against the crown." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "I don't understand the charge, Lord Protector." Lord Zerion gestured, and the air above them filled with holographic images. Marcus watched in growing horror as recordings played showing Queen Lyralee's behavior over the past week. There she was, laughing in her private chambers. There she was, weeping over a piece of human music. There she was, expressing wonder and joy as she learned about Earth's cultures. "For 3,000 years, Zerion continued, his voice filled with cold anger. "Our empire has prospered because we eliminated the chaos of emotion from our society. Our queen has been the perfect example of logical rule, making decisions based on reason and wisdom alone. But since your arrival, she has become infected with the primitive emotional disease that destroys civilizations." Another council member, a female Zephyrian with intricate patterns carved into her silver skin, leaned forward. "We have recordings of the Queen humming, Commander Chen. Humming is an expression of joy and emotion so dangerous that it has been forbidden in our society for over 1,000 years. Our ruler is displaying behaviors that would result in immediate exile for any other citizen." Marcus found his voice, though his throat felt tight with fear. "Queen Lyralee is learning about different ways of experiencing life. That doesn't make her dangerous, does it not?" Lord Zerion stood, his imposing form casting shadows across the chamber. Yesterday, the Queen overturned the exile sentence of a citizen who had been caught expressing grief over a dead family member. She said that mourning was natural and should not be punished. Today, she suggested that our educational system should include instruction about emotional intelligence. These are not the actions of a logical ruler, human. These are the actions of a being whose mind has been corrupted by your primitive emotional chaos. The accusations continued for what felt like hours. The Noble Council presented evidence of every change in Queen Lyralee's behavior, from the smallest smile to her more compassionate judicial decisions. They played recordings of her conversations with Marcus, though the audio was partially corrupted, and they had clearly been obtained through hidden surveillance devices. "The Queen has been meeting with you in secret," another council member accused. "She has been learning about human mating rituals and emotional bonding. She has been exposed to your music, your poetry, your stories of love and passion. You have systematically destroyed everything that makes her fit to rule our people." Marcus felt anger building in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Queen Lyralee is still the same person she was before. She's just more complete now. Emotions don't make people weaker or less capable of leadership. They make people more understanding, more compassionate." "Compassion is weakness," Lord Zerion declared. "Understanding leads to favoritism and poor judgment. For 3 millennia, our empire has been strong because our leaders make decisions based on logic alone, not on the fleeting whims of emotional attachment." It was then that the chamber doors opened with a sound like crystal chiming, and Queen Lyralee entered. Marcus had never seen her look more regal or more determined. Her luminescent skin glowed brighter than usual, and her eyes held a fire that was both beautiful and slightly terrifying. The 12 council members immediately stood and bowed, but their body language radiated disapproval and concern. "Your Majesty," Lord Zarian said carefully, "we were not expecting you at these proceedings." "I am aware of that," Queen Lyrelei replied, her musical voice carrying new tones of authority that Marcus had never heard before. "I am also aware that you are conducting a trial against our honored guest without informing me. This is a violation of imperial protocol." The queen moved to stand beside Marcus, a gesture that sent visible shock waves through the assembled nobles. "Furthermore," she continued, "I am here to address the charges you have brought against Commander Chen, because they are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what has occurred." Lord Zarian's ancient face remained impassive, but Marcus could see tension in the way he held his shoulders. "Your Majesty, we are concerned for your well-being. The human has exposed you to dangerous emotional stimuli that are affecting your judgment and your ability to rule effectively." Queen Lyrelei stepped forward, moving closer to the council members. "My judgment has never been clearer, Lord Protector. For the first time in my life, I understand what it truly means to be alive. I have discovered that emotions are not chaotic forces that destroy civilizations. They are the very things that give life meaning and purpose." The chamber fell silent as the queen's words echoed off the dark walls. When she spoke again, her voice carried a passion that was completely unprecedented in Zephyrian royal address. "For 3,000 years we have lived in fear," she declared. "We have suppressed the very essence of what makes life worth living, because our ancestors chose safety over growth, control over connection. But I have learned that there is something more powerful than logic alone, something that makes decisions not just correct, but meaningful." Lord Zarian's composure finally cracked slightly. "Your Majesty, these are dangerous thoughts. The great devastation happened because our people allowed emotions to guide their actions. We cannot risk returning to those dark times. The great devastation happened because our people did not understand how to balance emotion with wisdom," Queen Lyrelei corrected. "But humans have achieved that balance. They feel deeply, love strongly, and yet they have built a civilization based on cooperation and growth rather than destruction." She turned to face Marcus directly, and in that moment, something passed between them that was visible to everyone in the chamber. Her silver skin flushed with golden light, her eyes brightened with unmistakable affection, and her perfect royal composure transformed into something more honest and vulnerable. "Commander Chen has not infected me with emotional chaos," she said, her voice softening as she looked at him. "He has awakened something in me that was always there, something that every Zephyrian possesses but has been taught to fear and suppress." Then, in a moment that would be remembered throughout galactic history, Queen Lyrelei did something that no Zephyrian ruler had ever done in front of the noble council. She reached out and took Marcus's hand in hers, interlacing their fingers in a gesture of unmistakable intimacy and connection. The reaction from the council members was immediate and intense. Several of them stepped backward in shock, while others exchanged alarmed glances. Lord Zarian's ancient face contorted with what Marcus realized was the closest thing to horror that a Zephyrian could express. But Queen Lyrelei was not finished. She looked directly at Marcus, her luminous eyes filled with a courage that took his breath away, and asked the question that would shake the foundations of the Zephyrian Empire. "Are you single, human?" The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything the Zephyrian civilization had believed for 3,000 years. It was not just a question about Marcus's relationship status. It was a public declaration of interest, an admission of emotional attachment, and a complete rejection of the emotionless existence that had defined her people for millennia. Marcus felt the weight of history in that moment, understanding that his answer would affect not just his own future, but the fate of an Entu. The chaos that erupted in the noble council chamber after Queen Lyrelei's question was unlike anything Marcus had ever witnessed. Lord Protector Zarian's composure shattered completely as he began shouting orders in the ancient Zephyrian language. Other council members were backing away from the queen as if she had become something dangerous and contagious. The sound of their voices, raised in alarm and anger, filled the chamber with a cacophony that hurt Marcus's ears. Through it all, Queen Lyrelei stood with her hand still holding Marcus's, her luminous skin glowing brighter with each passing moment. Her eyes never left his face, and despite the chaos surrounding them, she smiled with a joy so pure and radiant that Marcus felt his heart skip several beats. "Your Majesty," Lord Zarian finally managed to speak over the noise, his ancient voice trembling with barely controlled fury. "You have just committed the greatest act of treason in the history of our empire. You have publicly declared emotional attachment to an alien being. This cannot be permitted to continue. Queen Lirelei turned to face the council, and Marcus was amazed to see that her fear had been completely replaced by determination. Lord Protector, the only treason here is the crime we have committed against ourselves for 3,000 years. We have denied our own nature, suppressed our capacity for joy and love, and called it strength. But true strength comes from the courage to feel deeply and still choose to do what is right. The chamber doors burst open as more Zephyrian guards entered, followed by High Counselor Valdris and several other high-ranking officials. Marcus could see the panic in their movements, the way they struggled to maintain their emotionless facades while clearly experiencing intense distress at their queen's behavior. "Seize the human," Lord Zerion commanded. "He will be removed from the Empire immediately. As for Her Majesty, she will undergo intensive rehabilitation to purge the emotional contamination from her system." But before the guards could move toward Marcus, something unexpected happened. A group of younger Zephyrians entered the chamber, and Marcus was shocked to see expressions on their faces. Not the perfect neutral masks he had become accustomed to, but actual emotions, curiosity, hope, and something that looked remarkably like determination. The leader of this group was a Zephyrian female who appeared younger than most of the others, her silver skin bearing fewer of the ceremonial markings that indicated age and rank. She stepped forward and spoke directly to the noble council, her voice carrying tones that Marcus had never heard from any Zephyrian except the Queen. "Lord Protector Zerion," she said, "I am Sub-Commander Lyrian of the Palace Guard. I speak for many of our people who have been secretly experiencing emotions for years, hiding our true nature because we feared exile or worse." The revelation sent another shockwave through the chamber. Lord Zerion's ancient face contorted with what Marcus now recognized as horror and disbelief. "Impossible," the Lord Protector whispered. "Our monitoring systems would have detected emotional activity among the population." Sub-Commander Lyrian smiled, and it was the first time Marcus had seen a Zephyrian other than the Queen display such an expression. "We learned to hide our feelings behind masks of indifference, just as our ancestors did before the Great Suppression. But when Queen Lirelei showed us that it was possible to feel openly, to express joy and wonder without bringing disaster, many of us found the courage to acknowledge what we had been hiding." More Zephyrians began entering the chamber, and Marcus realized that a significant portion of the palace population had gathered. Young and old, guards and servants, officials and workers, all showing degrees of emotional expression that would have been unthinkable just days before. "Your Majesty gave us permission to be ourselves," another Zephyrian called out from the crowd. "She showed us that emotions do not make us weak or dangerous. They make us complete." Queen Lirelei squeezed Marcus's hand tighter, and he could feel her trembling slightly, not with fear, he realized, but with overwhelming emotion at seeing her people begin to awaken to their suppressed nature. Lord Zerion raised his hands for silence, his ancient form seeming to shrink as he faced the crowd of emotionally awakened Zephyrians. "This is exactly what our ancestors feared," he declared. "Emotional chaos spreading through the population like a plague. This is how civilizations fall." "No," Queen Lirelei said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "This is how civilizations truly begin to live." She stepped forward, releasing Marcus's hand to address her people directly. "For 3,000 years we have been surviving, not living. We have been efficient but not happy. We have been logical but not wise. True wisdom comes from understanding that logic and emotion together create better decisions than either can make alone." Marcus watched in amazement as more and more Zephyrians began to openly display emotions. Some were weeping, tears of luminescent fluid streaming down their silver faces. Others were laughing, the sound musical and joyful. Still others simply stood with expressions of wonder and relief, as if they were breathing freely for the first time in their lives. But not all the Zephyrians in the chamber were celebrating this emotional awakening. Marcus could see that roughly half the population remained locked in their traditional emotionless state, viewing the transformation of their fellow citizens with alarm and disgust. The Empire was dividing before his eyes, splitting into those who embraced feeling and those who clung to the old ways. The tension reached a breaking point when Lord Zerion stood and raised his ceremonial staff, a symbol of ancient authority that had been used to maintain order for millennia. "By the power granted to me by the sacred laws of emotional purity," he declared, his voice echoing through the chamber, I declare Queen Lyrelai unfit to rule and strip her of all royal authority. The noble council will assume control of the empire until a suitable replacement can be found. The declaration sent shockwaves through both factions of Zephyrians. Those who had embraced emotions cried out in protest, while those who remained traditional nodded in grim approval. Marcus felt his blood run cold as he realized the implications. A coup was taking place, and Queen Lyrelai was being removed from power because she had dared to feel. But the queen herself seemed unsurprised by this development. She stood straighter, her luminous skin glowing brighter than ever, and when she spoke, her voice carried the kind of authority that could not be stripped away by political maneuvering. "Lord Protector Zerion," she said calmly, "you may claim my throne, but you cannot claim my people's hearts. They have tasted freedom now, the freedom to feel and express their true nature. Do you really believe you can force them back into emotional slavery?" The chamber erupted in conflict as the two factions of Zephyrians began to argue and push against each other. Some called for the queen's restoration, while others demanded her immediate exile. Marcus found himself caught in the middle of what was rapidly becoming a civil war. Queen Lyrelai grabbed his arm urgently. "We must leave," she said. "There are those among the traditionalists who would kill us both rather than allow this emotional awakening to continue." As if to confirm her words, Marcus saw several of the palace guards drawing weapons that hummed with dangerous energy. The conflict was escalating beyond mere political disagreement into actual violence. Sub-Commander Lyrian and several other emotionally awakened Zephyrians formed a protective circle around Marcus and the Queen. "This way, Your Majesty," Lyrian urged. "We have ships prepared for evacuation." As they fought their way through the chaotic crowd toward the chamber exit, Marcus heard Lord Zerion's voice rising above the noise, issuing commands that chilled his blood. "Activate the neural suppression fields throughout the Empire," the ancient Zephyrian commanded. "Any citizen displaying emotional behavior will be subjected to immediate reconditioning. As for the Queen and the human, they are to be captured alive for public execution, as examples of the dangers of emotional contamination." Queen Lyrelai's people rushed them through corridors that were now filled with conflict as emotionally awakened Zephyrians clashed with traditionalist forces. Marcus could hear the sounds of energy weapons firing and the musical voices of Zephyrians raised in anger, fear, and defiance. As they reached a hidden docking bay where several small ships waited, Queen Lyrelai turned to Marcus with tears streaming down her face. But these were not tears of sadness. They were tears of determination and hope. "Marcus," she said, "what we have started here cannot be stopped. My people are remembering what it means to truly live, and no amount of force can make them forget again. But the cost may be higher than either of us imagined." As their escape ship lifted off from the palace ship, Marcus looked back to see explosions lighting up the crystalline structure. The Zephyrian Empire was tearing itself apart, divided between those who chose to feel and those who refused to abandon 3,000 years of emotional suppression. But as he held Queen Lyrelai in his arms while she wept for her people and their uncertain future, Marcus knew that some things were worth fighting for, even if the cost was the destruction of everything that had come before. Commander Marcus Chen stood at the observation deck of the UES Harmony, watching the massive crystalline structure grow larger as their ship approached. The Zephyrian palace ship stretched for kilometers in every direction, its translucent walls catching and bending starlight into rainbow patterns that danced across its surface. After 3 years of careful negotiations through long-distance communications, this moment marked humanity's first face-to-face diplomatic meeting with the Zephyrian Empire. Marcus adjusted his formal diplomatic uniform one last time and ran through the protocols in his mind. The Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy as beings of pure logic and reason. Their empire spanned over 200 star systems, and they had never shown emotion in any of their previous communications. Ambassador Williams had stressed repeatedly that any display of human emotional behavior could end the negotiations before they began. "Commander, we're receiving docking clearance," reported Lieutenant Torres from the bridge. "The Zephyrians are directing us to Bay 7. Marcus nodded and made his way to the shuttle bay where the rest of the diplomatic team waited. Ambassador Williams, a stern woman in her 60s, gave him a final briefing as their shuttle prepared to launch. "Remember, the Zephyrians see emotions as primitive and chaotic. They believe that feelings lead to poor decisions and conflict. Keep your expressions neutral, speak only when spoken to, and whatever you do, don't smile. They interpret smiling as a sign of deception or madness. The shuttle ride to the Zephyrian Palace ship took 20 minutes. As they passed through the energy barrier that served as an airlock, Marcus felt a strange tingling sensation, as if the ship itself was scanning them. The docking bay was enormous, with ceilings that disappeared into misty heights above. Strange geometric patterns covered every surface, and the air hummed with an energy that made his skin feel slightly warm. A group of Zephyrians waited for them at the shuttle ramp. Marcus had seen images of them before, but seeing them in person was completely different. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with elongated limbs and skin that looked like polished silver. Their faces were angular and perfectly symmetrical, with large eyes that seemed to hold depths of swirling color. They moved with fluid grace as if they were floating rather than walking. The lead Zephyrian stepped forward and spoke in perfectly clear English, though his voice had an odd musical quality to it. "Welcome, beings of Earth. I am High Counselor Valdris. Her Majesty Queen Lyrelei awaits your presence in the Hall of Convergence." The diplomatic team followed Valdris through corridors that seemed to shift and change as they walked. The walls were transparent in some places, offering views of the star-filled void outside, and opaque in others, showing swirling patterns of light and color. Marcus noticed that every Zephyrian they passed maintained the same neutral expression, the same measured movements. It was like walking through a city populated by elegant statues. The Hall of Convergence was breathtaking. The chamber rose in a perfect dome above them, its walls made of some crystal that captured and amplified light until the entire space glowed with soft radiance. Hundreds of Zephyrians stood in organized rows, their silver forms creating patterns that seemed both random and perfectly ordered. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform that seemed to be carved from a single massive gem, stood Queen Lyrelei. Marcus had to consciously control his reaction when he saw her. The queen was unlike any being he had ever encountered. She was taller than the other Zephyrians, perhaps 9 feet in height, and her skin had a luminescence that made her appear to glow from within. Her hair, if it could be called hair, flowed around her shoulders like liquid starlight. Her eyes were the most striking feature, large and expressive, holding colors that shifted between deep violet and brilliant gold. Ambassador Williams stepped forward and began the formal greeting that had been negotiated over months of communication. She spoke in careful, measured tones, presenting the gifts from Earth and explaining humanity's hopes for peaceful cooperation between their species. Queen Lyrelei listened without any change in expression, her face as neutral and emotionless as every other Zephyrian in the hall. When Williams finished, the queen responded in the same musical voice as her counselor, acknowledging the gifts and expressing the Zephyrian Empire's interest in learning about human civilization. It was during this formal exchange that Marcus noticed something odd. While the queen's voice and posture remained perfectly composed, her eyes kept shifting toward him. At first, he thought he might be imagining it, but as the ceremony continued, he became certain that Queen Lyrelei was watching him specifically. The moment that changed everything came during the presentation of Earth's cultural artifacts. Ambassador Williams was displaying a holographic image of human art and music when she mentioned the importance of emotional expression in human creativity. As she spoke about how humans used art to share their feelings and connect with each other, Marcus saw the queen's eyes widen slightly. It was such a small change that none of the other humans noticed. But in a room full of beings who showed no emotion at all, even the tiniest shift in expression was significant. Queen Lyrelei's gaze fixed on Marcus with what he could only describe as curiosity, and for just a moment, her perfectly controlled mask slipped. The ceremonial conclusion required the exchange of symbolic objects. As the senior military officer present, Marcus was responsible for presenting the Earth delegation's final gift, a simple wooden sculpture carved by human artists to represent the bond between different species reaching across the stars to find common ground. As Marcus approached the platform, he could feel the weight of hundreds of Zephyrian eyes upon him, but the only gaze that mattered was the queen's. When he reached the base of the platform, she descended the steps to meet him, moving with that same fluid grace as her people. The sculpture was meant to be placed on a ceremonial table, but as Marcus reached forward to set it down, his hand brushed against a crystal artifact that was already there. The artifact began to slip, and without thinking, Marcus lunged forward to catch it. His reflexes were quick enough to save the crystal from hitting the floor, but in doing so, his hand touched Queen Lyrilay's as she also reached to steady the falling object. The contact lasted less than a second, but its effect was immediate and profound. The Queen's silver skin flushed with golden light where their hands touched, and her luminous eyes widened with what Marcus could only call wonder. A soft sound escaped her lips, something between a gasp and a sigh, and for that brief moment, she looked not like an emotionless ruler of a vast empire, but like a being experiencing something new and amazing. The reaction from the assembled Zephyrians was swift and unmistakable. A ripple of movement passed through the crowd as hundreds of beings shifted uncomfortably. Marcus heard whispered conversations in the Zephyrian language, words he couldn't understand but whose tone conveyed concern and disapproval. Queen Lyrelei recovered her composure quickly, her face returning to its neutral expression. But the damage was done. Marcus could see High Counselor Valdris exchanging worried looks with other officials. The Queen's moment of emotional display had clearly violated some fundamental rule of their society. As the ceremony concluded, and the human delegation was escorted to their assigned quarters, Marcus felt the Queen's gaze following him. When he glanced back, their eyes met across the vast hall, and he saw something there that made his breath catch. Behind her carefully maintained mask of indifference, Queen Lyrelei was looking at him with unmistakable interest, and perhaps something more. The implications of what had just happened began to settle in Marcus's mind as they reached their quarters. He had somehow caused the ruler of the Zephyrian Empire to show emotion in front of her entire court. In a society that viewed emotional display as weakness or madness, this could be catastrophic for both the Queen and for humanity's hopes of alliance. But as he replayed the moment of contact in his mind, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that what had happened between them was not a diplomatic disaster, but the beginning of something far more significant than anyone could have imagined.